All right, ready to dive into a new deep dive.
Always. What are we tackling today?
Today we're gonna explore the world of fractions.
Oh, fractions. Those bring back memories.
Right, fractions. I feel like everyone remembers learning about fractions, maybe not always fondly.
Yeah. Maybe not everyone's favorite topic. A little intimidating, maybe.
Yeah, can be a little bit dry, right?
Yeah.
All those rules and stuff. But we're gonna try to bring some new life to fractions today.
Sounds good.
We're actually, believe it or not, we are working with a textbook section on fractions.
Okay.
Back to school.
Back to school.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think this textbook does a good job at reminding us that fractions are actually everywhere,
Yeah, they are. They're super practical.
like more than we even realize.
Totally.
And it starts with, the basics, kind of a basic explanation.
Okay.
But then it goes into this story about two friends, Suhash and Farida,
Oh, I like where this is going.
sharing food. And I feel like that's such a relatable
It's very relatable.
situation, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like we've all been there. You got to share something. You got to divide it up.
Especially food.
So in this case, Suhash forgot his lunch.
Oh, no.
And Farida's, she's being a good friend, and she offers to share her porous. She's got 5 delicious porous.
Oh.
So they each take 2.
All right.
So far, so good, right?
Easy.
2 whole porous, but then there's that 1 left over.
Yeah. What do you do with that last one?
What do you do? And that's where the fractions come in.
Of course. You split it in half.
Yeah, you split it in
Right.
half. So 1 divided by 2, right?
Exactly. And that's how we write it, too. 1/2. 1/2.
There you go. See, we're already doing fractions.
Run a roll.
And I like how this highlights, this whole idea of equal parts.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't want to just, break the porous
No.
and give someone a tiny piece.
Has to be fair.
Exactly. Fractions are all about fairness.
That's a good point. I never thought of that. Fractions. The keepers of fairness.
Right. It's like the math of making sure everyone gets their fair share,
Exactly.
which is kind of cool when you think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this idea of fractions representing parts of a whole.
Right. The fundamentals.
Back to Subhash and Farida. So they started with 5 whole porous.
Right.
By the end, they each had 2 whole porous and then a half.
2.5.
2.5, exactly.
Perfect. See, fractions in action already.
Exactly. Okay, so we're starting to see how those fractions work, right?
Yeah.
But now we got to break down, what actually makes up a fraction.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty.
It's time for, dare I say it, a vocab
A
lesson.
little vocab refresher. But don't worry, no quizzes here.
No, we're just having fun. Okay, so let's talk about those 2 main parts of a fraction. We've got the top number and the bottom number.
Right.
What are they called again?
So the top number, that's the numerator,
Yeah.
and the bottom number, that's our denominator.
The denominator.
Yeah, it's always fun to say denominator.
It's true.
It's a good one.
It does have a good ring to it.
It does.
Okay, so denominator, numerator.
Yeah.
What do they actually tell us? What's the difference?
Right. So the denominator, think of it like this. Let's say you've got a pizza,
Okay, I like where this is going.
and you're going to cut it into 8 slices.
8 slices, classic.
The denominator, that's the 8. It tells you how many total slices, how many parts the whole is divided into.
So the denominator is all about the size of the slices.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. So then the numerator, that's where things get tasty, right?
Exactly. So let's say you eat 3 of those pizza slices.
3 out of 8.
The numerator is the 3. It tells you how many of those slices, how many of those parts you're actually dealing with.
Okay, so 3/8 of the pizza, gone. That's how we'd write it. It's a fraction, 3/8.
You got it.
Fractions are making me hungry.
Always.
See, fractions, they're not just abstract math problems. They're how we understand and relate to the world around us, especially when it comes to things like sharing food.
Exactly. And you know what else helps us understand fractions? Visualizing them. Remember those number lines we all used back in the day?
Oh, yeah. Those take me back
They might seem basic,
a little bit.
but they're actually really helpful for getting a handle on fractions. Our textbook even uses one as an example. Imagine marking 1/2 on a number line, right between 0 and 1.
Okay, yeah, I can picture that.
It's a simple visual,
Right.
but it makes it so clear how 1/2 fits into the whole number line.
It's like you're taking that space between 0 and 1, that hole, and you're like, boom, right down the middle. It's like a measuring cup, but for numbers.
Exactly, you got it. And speaking of measuring cups, those recipes that call for 1.5 cups of flour or 2.25 teaspoons of something, that's where those other types of fractions come in, like mixed numbers.
Oh, right, mixed numbers. So we've got regular fractions, like the 1/2 we were just talking about, and then we've got these mixed numbers. What else is there?
Well, you've got proper fractions, where the top number, the numerator, is smaller than the bottom number, the denominator.
Okay.
Like 3/7 or 4/15. Those are the ones that behave themselves, stay within the boundaries of a whole. But then you've got those rebellious teenagers of the fraction world.
Oh, no. What do they do?
Those are the improper
Yeah,
fractions.
improper. My goodness.
Yeah, the numerator is bigger than the denominator, like 9/4 or something.
So they're like, we don't care about your whole. We're going above and beyond.
Exactly. But they're actually really useful when you need to represent something that's more than one whole but less than two. Like in our textbook, they talk about 4 friends sharing 5 apples equally.
Okay, I'm following. So each friend gets one whole apple,
Right.
and then you've got one apple left over to divide into fourths. So each friend ends up with 1 1/4 apples.
Exactly. And that, my friend, is a mixed number in action. It's like the perfect blend of a whole number and a fraction working together in perfect harmony.
I like it. Okay, so we've got proper fractions, improper fractions, mixed numbers. This is making me realize there's a lot more to the world of fractions than I initially thought.
Right. It's a whole system.
But here's a thought.
yeah.
What if I told you that different fractions could actually represent the same amount?
Now, that might sound a little mind-boggling at first.
It does. It feels like you're messing with the laws of math or something.
It does, but trust me, it's true. Think of it like this. You and I both have a chocolate bar, right?
Okay, I'm already hungry again.
I break mine in half and eat 1 piece. You break yours into 4 pieces and eat 2. We've eaten different numbers of pieces,
True.
but we've actually eaten the same amount of chocolate.
Oh, right. Because my 2 smaller pieces equal your 1 bigger piece.
Exactly, and that's what we call equivalent fractions. They might look different on the surface, but deep down they represent the same value.
So 1/2 is equivalent to 2/4. That's wild.
It is, and it's a game changer when you start simplifying fractions or trying to compare fractions with different denominators.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does this whole equivalent fraction thing actually work? Like, what's the math behind it?
It's all about understanding the relationship between the numerator and the denominator. Remember, if you multiply or divide both the numerator and denominator of a fraction by the same number, you're essentially just changing the way the fraction looks, not its actual value.
Okay, yeah, I remember us talking about that earlier, but I'm still not quite sure how that plays out in real life.
Sure, think about it like this. Let's say you're doubling a recipe, right? And the original recipe calls for 1/4 cup of sugar.
Okay, got it. 1/4 cup. Got my measuring cups ready.
Now, instead of actually measuring out 1/4 cup twice, you could just use the equivalent fraction of 1/2.
Oh, that's way easier. I always make a mess when I'm measuring out small amounts like that.
Exactly. So knowing your equivalent fractions can actually save you time and effort in the kitchen.
Right. I'm all about efficiency, especially when it comes to baking.
Absolutely. And speaking of efficiency, there's also this thing called simplifying fractions.
Okay, yeah, I remember seeing that in the textbook. Something about finding the simplest form of a fraction.
Exactly. It's like decluttering your fraction drawer. So
Yeah.
let's say you end up with a fraction like 12/18. A little bit clunky.
Right, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely not as elegant as like 1/2.
Exactly. So to simplify it, we use something called the greatest common factor.
The what? Okay, that sounds intimidating.
It's not as scary as it sounds, I promise. The greatest common factor, or GCF for short, is just the biggest number that divides evenly into both the numerator and the denominator.
Okay, so in the case of 12/18, the GCF would be 6, because 6 is the biggest number that goes into both 12 and 18.
You got it. You're a natural. So once you've found that GCF, you just divide both parts of the fraction by it.
So 12 divided by 6 is 2, and 18 divided by 6 is 3.
Exactly. Which means that 12/18 simplified is just 2/3. Much more manageable, right?
Way more manageable. And like, we distilled that fraction down to its purest form.
Precisely. And, there are even more shortcuts and tricks when it comes to fractions.
Oh, tell me more. I'm all about those math hacks.
Have you ever heard of the cross product method? It's a neat little way to check if 2 fractions are equivalent without having to do a ton of calculations.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. How does it work?
It's pretty simple, actually. You multiply the numerator of the first fraction by the denominator of the second fraction. Then you do the same thing with the other 2 numbers, so the denominator of the first fraction times the numerator of the second.
Okay, so far so good.
And if those 2 cross products are equal, then bam, the fractions are equivalent.
Okay, let me try it out. So
Yeah.
if we wanted to see if 1/2 is equivalent to 3/6, we'd multiply 1 times 6, which is 6, and then 2 times 3, which is also 6, they match.
Exactly. You've got it. Fractions might seem a little mysterious at first, but once you get the hang of them, they're actually quite elegant, full of these neat little patterns and relationships.
It's true. I'm starting to appreciate fractions a lot more now. This has been a really cool deep dive.
I agree. We started with a simple story about sharing food and ended up exploring equivalent fractions, simplification, even a little bit of mathematical magic with that cross-product method.
Who knew there was so much to discover about fractions? And who knew they could be so useful even in the kitchen?
Right. They're everywhere once you start to notice them.
That's a great point. Well, I think we've successfully brought fractions to life today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.